dom.js. Now we're exporting a few different things from this file and importing them over here. Now what I'm going to do is create a third file in the source folder called data.js, and this is going to be responsible for manipulating data and that kind of thing. The first thing I'm going to do is just paste in some data from my repo just an array of different users, each one an object with a name and a premium flag. So imagine now I want to export this thing from this file. Now previously when we've been exporting things, we've been exporting multiple different things, and we did that by just putting an export keyword in front of the things we wanted to export, or just exporting them down here like this. Now we can also use what's known as a default export, and a default export can be seen as the main thing that we want to export from a file, and we can only have one default export per file. So in this case, I'd want the default export value of this data file to be the user's array right here, the data itself. So we'd make something a default export by saying this export, then default, and then the thing we want to export as the default value. Now we want to export users. So now this will be the default value that we export from this file. Now let's try importing this. So I'm going to save it and go to index. And when we import a default value, we don't use curly braces like this. We just say import and then whatever we want to import, and this name can be whatever you want. So for example, I could call this test from then the name of the file, so that's // to say current directory data. So this is going to import this thing right here, users. Now I don't have to name it users because we're not putting this in curly braces to import specific things. We're importing the default value, and there's only one default value per file. So it's not going to look for something called test. It knows when we use something outside of curly braces that this is the default export we want. So it knows to get this thing right here. But for continuity, I tend to call them the same thing anyway. So I'm going to import users from data. So now if I wanted to use this, I could do, I'm just going to say console.log, and we're going to log out the users. So let me save this. We need to run npm run webpak for this to compile. And when it's done, let's go over here, and now we can see this thing over here, all of the users. So we have now exported a default value, and we've imported that right here. Now, just because we export a default value in this file, it doesn't mean that we can't export anything else as well. So let's try creating a function now inside this file that we also want to export. So I'm going to say down here, const get prem users, and this function is going to be responsible for getting the actual premium users from a users array. So we're going to take in a parameter which will pass in when we call this function later, and inside we're going to return a value, and that value is going to be users.filter, so it will be a filtered array, and we only want to keep a user in that array if the user.premium is true. So if user.premium is true as we cycle through the users array, then it's going to keep that inside the filtered array, and we're returning this filtered array at the end. So now I want to export this as well, so I could come up here and say export const premium users, and now we can import this thing right here. So let me copy that and come over here to index. And now, because we're importing a named export, and I say named export because that's what these things are when we're exporting specific names and not just the default. So we can import that the same way as these named imports. So let's do a comma first of all, because we're done with the default export. Now we want to also import a named export. So we want to import this thing right here, get prem users. And now from this file, we can use that. So I'm going to say in this file now, const, and then I'll just call this prem users is equal to get prem users, which is the function we just imported. We need to pass an argument through here, remember, because we take an argument in here. So we'll just take in the users, which we imported as well, and we'll pass that in. So users, and now down here, I'm going to log out prem users as well as users. So let me see if this all works. I'm going to save it, come down here, run npm run webpak. Then I'm going to come to the browser and see if this works. So we can see now the users here and also the premium users. So this is the value returned by that function. So this is working. We're importing the default export now, users, and also this named export, the function which we're calling right here. So remember, to export a default value, we say export default users. And to export other values, we can say export const and then whatever the value is. Now, let's have a look at the alternative way of exporting things where we define it all at the bottom. So I'm going to delete that, and I'm also going to delete this. Now, the way we do this is by saying export and then the object. We want to export get prem users, which is this function right here. So now we're doing that one, but we also want to export this. But we want to export it as the default value. And the way we do that down here is by saying users as default. So now it exports this as the default object. And again, we don't need to change now the way we're importing these things over here. This is just an alternative way of exporting. So let me save this now. Let me run this again. Npm run webpak and preview. And we can see everything still works the same way. So my friends, that's how we use default export. It's a default value from a file that we want to export, and we can only have one default export value per file. Okay then, so now we can use modules inside our project, which is going to really help us to structure our code a bit better in the future. But there is a small problem. Every time we make a change to a file inside our source folder at the minute, we have to rerun the webpak command to rebundle the JavaScript. So every time we change, we say npm run webpak to do that. And then we see those changes live in the browser. It would be nice if we could instead have Webpack automatically rerun every time we make a change to a file and save it, much like we did with Babel before. And we can do this. All we need to do is come to package.json, and where we have our Webpack script, come to the end, space -w to watch the files. So if we save this now, we still have to run this command once. So we'll say npm run webpak, and that is going to bundle our files once the first time round. Then it's going to be actively listening for changes. So now if I come to index file and make a change and save, it's going to rerun Webpack automatically. So notice at the minute we have these two console logs. If I now say down here console.log test and then save, it's automatically going to rebundle this and we should see this in the browser. So let's do that. And voila, we can do. So this is a nicer workflow now. Now this is actively watching for changes right now, and you can cancel that process if you want. And to do that, you just press Control and C down here. It will ask you to terminate the job, and we say yes, then press enter. And now it's cancelled that watching. If you want to start watching again, you just say npm run webpak and press enter again. So then this workflow is good now, but there is an alternative workflow which is nice too, and that involves using the Webpack Dev Server. So we're going to take a look at that in the next lecture. So then my friends, at the moment we have quite a nice workflow going on. We're currently using a VS Code package over here called Live Server to spin up a local development server so we can actually preview the project in a browser. At the minute I'm going to stop that and I'll tell you why in a second. And we're also using the webpak command with a watch flag down here to capture any changes and rebundle our code. So this is all nice, but it would be even better if we could reduce those two separate tasks, running the live server from here using that package and also running the webpak command into one single task. And we can do all of this using the Webpack Dev Server. So that's why I stopped the live server over here, because now we're going to use the Webpack Dev Server to actively listen for changes inside our files and to spin up a local development server so we can preview this in the browser. So the first thing we need to do is actually install the Webpack Dev Server. So let's do this down here. We say npm install, and we're going to install the webpack-dev-server at 3.2.1. That's the version number. So press enter and that that's installing this for us now. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is configure that Webpack Dev Server inside the Webpack Config File over here. So to do that, we need another property. So let me come to the end here where we do this stuff and do a comma. And then this property is called Dev Server like so. And this is an object. Now inside this object, we have two different properties. The first one is going to be the content base, and this is going to be an absolute path which is going to tell the Webpack Dev Server where the base directory is that we want to serve up to the browser. So what we're going to do is say path.resolve, because this is an absolute path from the root of our computer. Then in brackets we're going to say underscore underscore doorname, and we're going to pass the second one in, which is our dist folder. So this is the folder we want to serve up to the browser, right, where the index file is. So we're getting the doorname to get us to the project root, and then we're joining that with the dist folder right here. So that's what we're serving up to the browser now. Now the second property down here is going to be the public path property. And this tells Webpack where the actual assets, i.e. the JavaScript, are being served up from. So that is from this assets folder right here. So we don't need to do the whole path like this stuff and this stuff. We just need to say the path from inside the distribution folder. And that is going to be inside the assets folder. So / assets /. So we need to tell this to the Webpack server, because when it serves up our files inside this public path to the browser, it doesn't actually serve up the real physical files inside it. Instead, what it does is serve up virtual files that it stores in memory, and it uses this file path to serve them, because this is the file path that we link to from our index.html file right here. So this speeds up the Webpack Dev Server, because it doesn't have to manually write a new file to our distribution folder every time we make a change. So then, now we've configured the Webpack Dev Server, we just need to run it. So I'm going to save it over here, and I'm going to come to the package.json file to make a new script. And this one is going to be called serve. And inside here, we're just going to say webpack-dev-server. That's all we need to do. We could just type this down here instead, but we're going to write npm run serve. So if I save this now, what I'm going to do is come down here and say npm run serve. That is going to run the Webpack Dev Server, and it's going to do the rest of the things for us as well. It's going to bundle up all of our JavaScript and output the file, but it's only going to do that in memory using it virtual files. So let me run this now, serve, and now we can see this is served successfully. If we just scroll up a bit, up here, we're going to see this thing right here. So that is where the local development server is now running. So if I control plus click this, then we're going to see this over here. I can inspect and go to the console, and we can get rid of that error. Let me just refresh. And now we can see everything still runs the same way. Now the Webpack Dev Server is automatically watching for file changes. We don't need to add on the W flag. So I can test this by coming to one of our files, like index.js, and I'm going to change this to test2. I'm going to save that, and automatically it's going to reboot here and say npm run serve. That is going to run the Webpack Dev Server, and it's going to do the rest of the things for us as well. It's going to bundle up all of our JavaScript and output the file, but it's only going to do that in memory using virtual files. So let me run this now, serve, and now we can see this manually. So then, and I'm going to come to serve. But when it's come down here and let me run this now, serve, we're going to see this thing right here. So that is where the local development server is now running. So if I control plus click this, then we're going to see this over here. I can inspect and go to the console, and we can get rid of that error. Let me just refresh, and now we can see everything still runs the same way. Now the Webpack Dev Server is automatically watching for file changes. We don't need to add on the W flag, so I can test this by coming to one of our files, like index.js, and I'm going to change this to test2. I'm going to save that, and automatically it's going to rebundle the code into a virtual file and serve that up, so we can now see test2. There is one problem though. Like I've been saying, when we run the Webpack Dev Server, it serves the assets, i.e. the JavaScript, as virtual files. It does not rebuild all of our files and put them into bundle.js physically. Now I can demo this. What I'm going to do is come to bundle.js and I'm going to delete all of this stuff. Now I'm going to come to index and say test3, and I'm going to save it. Now this should again run all of our Webpack config and bundle up our files. But if I go to bundle.js, in fact I can close this off and open it again, there is still nothing there. So it's not bundled it up and output it physically to this file. All it's done is created a virtual file which is serving up from this path. So when we view it in a browser, we can still see the same results, and we can still see all of this logged to the console because it's serving that virtual file, that virtual JavaScript file, but we don't see it inside bundle.js. There is no physical manifestation of it. Now this is great for development because it speeds things up for us every time we make a save, but it's not so good when we come to deploy the application because there's nothing here. So we're going to take a look at that problem in the next lecture. Right then, so we have our Webpack Dev Server all set up and running now, but we just saw that this is only good when we're in a development mode, because at the minute it's only serving up these virtual files and it's not spitting any real code out into bundle.js when we use that. So if we want to build this for production, we need to actually create the resulting bundle.js file so that then we could upload it to a server somewhere. So inside our package.json file, we have a serve script for running our Webpack server, and it's serving up these virtual files. This is our development script, if you like, which is good for when we're working on our site. But now let's make another script which is actually going to produce our final bundle and spit out the real code to this file. So to do that, we can just use this thing which we used before, Webpack. But what we're going to do is take off the watch file, because we're only typically going to build this once when we want to build it for production. We don't need to watch files anymore and rerun this when we're making changes, because that's what the development script is for. So we're going to run this to build the application. Now, I called this one serve to serve it up when we're developing. I'm going to call this one build, because we can say npm run build now, and that is going to run the normal Webpack file like we did before. It's going to run all of this. It's going to take our source files and spit them out into this file right here, the bundle.js. So now we have one script for building and one script for development, serve. So that's good. Now I'm going to delete this Babel script because we don't need that anymore at the minute. What we'll be doing is eventually incorporating Babel into our Webpack config. But anyway, now we have these two scripts right here. So let me just save that, and now we have that. I could come down here to the bottom. I'm going to cancel out of this process by pressing Control-C and pressing yes, and then I'm going to say npm run build like so, and that is going to run this script. It's going to run Webpack, and then hopefully if we open up bundle.js, we can see all of that code. So that is our build script. And if we wanted to now, we could take this dist folder and upload it to a server somewhere. Now, there's one more thing I'd like to talk about in this video. So you see this big yellow warning message that we get every time we run any kind of Webpack command. This is saying we've not set a mode for our script that we're running here. So setting a mode for Webpack tells it whether we're going to be building for development or for production. Now, a development mode would make the Webpack process and build much quicker, but the output files are not going to be optimized as much. And the production mode is going to make the Webpack process slower to run. However, it does much more to the code and makes the output file more efficient and smaller in file size, which is what we want for production when we're uploading that file. So ideally, we want this thing right here to be run in development mode, so it's quicker, and we want this thing right here to be run in production mode, so it's slower, but it's optimizing our code more, so when we deploy it, it's going to be better for the end user. So how do we define these modes? Well, all we do is come inside the script, and at the end we do double dash, then mode, and then we say what mode we want. Now for the build, we want production. And for serve, we want to say mode, and then development. So now we are specifying these different modes for these different scripts. And if I come down to the bottom now over here, I'm going to clear first of all, and now I'm going to say npm run build. We should no longer see that warning, so press enter, and we don't get that big yellow warning anymore. It still builds everything for us, and it does this in production mode. And now if I say npm run serve this time, then it's going to run it in development mode, and we see we don't get that big yellow error, or rather warning again. We just get all of this information, and now we could preview this in localhost 8080, which has come onto my browser over here. So let me put it over here, inspect, and go to the console, and this all still works. So now we have a nice workflow. We have one script for development, and we have one script for production. So in the next video, what I'd like to do is reintroduce Babel and see how we can join these two technologies together. So essentially run Babel through our Webpack config file so that when we build our JavaScript, it's going to convert all of that modern JavaScript into older syntax, which is widely supported. Alright then gang, so we've seen how Webpack can help us work with modules, and we've also seen how we can use the Webpack Dev Server too. But at the minute, Babel is taking a back seat, and the resulting code that we serve to the browser has not been converted into older syntax that every browser understands. I can demo this. If we scroll all the way to the right inside bundle.js, we can see things like arrow functions. Now these are modern features which older browsers like IE11 do not support. So although Webpack is now enabling us to use modules and bundle everything together, it's also currently skipping out Babel, which converts our code. So it would be nice to implement Babel back into the workflow. To do this, we're going to have to go back to our Webpack config file and talk about loaders in Webpack. So loaders in Webpack are like tasks that we can run on our code when it's loaded via the module system. By that I mean when it's loaded via some kind of input statement. And at that moment, when it's loaded, we can run loaders or our tasks on that code. So what we want to do is run a Babel loader to convert that code into widely supported syntax at that point. And we configure that Babel loader right here inside the Webpack file. First of all though, we need to install the Babel loader. So down here, what I'm going to do is say npm install babel-loader, and we're going to save this to our dev dependencies. So --save dev and press enter. Okay, so now we can configure this loader in Webpack. So first of all, we need to create a module property, and this property is going to allow us to set up how the module system works in Webpack. And that's what we want to do, right? We want to use a Babel loader when our code is imported using Webpack's module system. So pretty much anything we write in these JavaScript files inside the source folder, we want to run through the Babel loader. So we're going to create this module property right here to do this. So this is an object, and we need to specify in here a rules property, like so. This is an array of objects. And each object is a single rule. So I've created our first object here. And inside this rules object, what we're doing is basically two things. We're going to test for certain files because we want to run the Babel Webpack on certain files only. We only want to run it on the JavaScript files right here. We don't want to run it on anything else. And also, we need to say which loader we want to run on those files. So first of all, we do this little test, and this test is a regular expression. This regular expression is going to describe which files that we want to run through this loader. So I'm going to create a regular expression, then I'll explain it. So remember, regular expressions go in between two forward slashes. Then we'll do a backslash and a dot, then JS, then $. So this regular expression is testing for any file that ends in .js. And by the way, that's what we're testing, file names here. So we're saying inside the regular expression, we want the JS to be at the end. That's what the $sign means, at the end. And right here we have a dot. Now in regular expressions, remember, a dot means any character by default. Now we don't want that. We want this to be the literal dot. So what I've done is put a backslash in front of that, and when we do that, it escapes the normal behavior of this thing, and now it means a literal dot. So this whole expression means look for files which end in .js, and that's what we want to run through the Babel loader. However, there will be certain JavaScript files we do not want to run through the Babel loader. Imagine we import some kind of package from Node modules. Then we don't want to run that through the Babel loader because that's code that someone else has written that we've just installed. So we don't want to do any additional processing on their code. We just want to do it on our code. So what we can do is also specify an exclude property, and we're going to say exclude anything in the node underscore modules folder. So this is another regular expression, but I'm just writing this out explicitly. So now we're going to get a match when something is in the node modules folder. We don't want to run anything from there through the Babel loader. So now we're looking for any JavaScript file not from here. So pretty much anything just in our source folder. We're going to run that through the loader. Now, we've not said what to use, which loader to use at this point. So let us come down here now and say use, and then this is an object, and then inside this object we say the loader we want to use, and that is the Babel loader that we just installed. Next, we also need to pass some options to this, and inside the options, there is going to be a presets property, and this just says which preset we want to use to do this transformation of code. So we're going to use the babel /preset env. Remember, this was the same one that we used when we had the babel RC file. I've deleted that now because we no longer use it, but this is what we had in it. Okay, so that is everything set up, so this should work. So now we're looking for any JavaScript file that's not coming from the node modules. We're going to run that through the Babel loader, and we're going to use this preset. And this is going to do the transformation every time that Webpack bundles our code. So every time we run the build command. So let me now save this, and we're going to test this out. So at the minute, inside data.js over here, we're using an arrow function. Now what I'm going to do is come down here and I'm going to say npm run build and press enter. It's going to run through Webpack, and it's going to do all of this Babel loader stuff as well to transform our new modern syntax into older, widely supported syntax, and then hopefully it's going to spit that out inside bundle.js. So now let me close that, reopen it, and we should see now function keywords. First of all, we see the var keyword. This is here instead of a const, so that's worked. And if we go to the right, we should see a function keyword at some point. Here we go, here's some function keywords as well. So now, right here, instead of, let me open this data, instead of this thing right here, and this arrow function right here, we're using function keywords. That is the older syntax which is supported in all browsers. So now we have Babel configured inside this Webpack file so that not only can we now use modules, but we're also using Babel now to convert our modern JavaScript code, which might not be supported, into widely supported older syntax. Alright then my friends, so we have done it. We've explored both Babel and Webpack together to give us this really nice workflow when we're creating websites driven by JavaScript. Now, you might be thinking that this is an awful lot of work to do every time you create a new project which uses JavaScript, and I would agree with you. But I want to make 2 points here. First of all, you don't always have to use Webpack for every single one of your projects. If you wanted to, you could just use a standard JavaScript file for your web page and have done with it. End of. However, for larger projects where we use a lot of different JavaScript files and we need to import things from those different files, and maybe we're using quite a lot of modern features, this is a really nice workflow. Now, secondly, when you do use this workflow and you do use Webpack, you're not going to need to rewrite your whole configuration and your whole project structure from scratch. Typically, what I do is create a boilerplate Webpack project. Then I upload that to GitHub once. Then whenever I want to create a new project, what I do is go and download that boilerplate and get up and running right away with that boilerplate. So what I've done is exactly that. I've uploaded a boilerplate project to the GitHub repo for this course. So you can get that from the lesson 165 drop down. Just type in 165 right here and you can see the branch. Then what you want to do is go to clone or download and download the zip right here. So I've already done that. And what I'm going to do is open that up, show in folder. You want to extract this right here and say extract all. And then that's going to create a new folder for you. I've already done that as well. So inside here, we can now see those extracted files. And if I go into that folder, I can see the boilerplate project. And inside this boilerplate project, we have all of this folder structure, the dist, the source. Then we have these files down here, package.json and webpak.config. So imagine now I want to create a new project using this kind of boilerplate. What I would do is go to File over here, then to Open Folder, and I create a new folder, whatever the project is called. I'm going to just call this project name here, doesn't really matter, and then I'd open that up. Then what I would do is go to all of the stuff inside the boilerplate, I'd copy all that, and I'd paste it inside here. So now when we open up this folder, inside VS Code is going to contain all of that boilerplate code. So we have a dist folder with the assets and the bundle.js there. We have an index file linking up to that bundle. And we also have a source folder where we can put all of our source JavaScript. It's currently just indexed at the minute. Then we have a package.json file and also a Webpack Config file as well with all of the Webpack setup. So we're defining our entry point, the output to bundle. We've configured the dev server and also the modules using the Babel loader. So now everything is set up ready for us to start developing. However, we don't see a node modules folder over here, and we do need that. We need those packages listed in package.json right here. So we need to install these. Now remember, to do that, we do not have to install each one of these manually. We can just say, if I clear the console first, npm install, and that is going to look at all of these packages and it's going to install each and every one. for you. So once it's done that, you're going to see this node modules folder, and that's all the packages installed. The only thing left we have to do is run this script right here, Npm Run Server, which is going to start up the Webpack Dev Server in development mode. Then we can start to develop. This one here, this is the build command, which when we're ready to deploy, we're going to build, and that will actually spit out all of our code into the bundle right here. So let's try running this one down here. We'll say Npm Run Serve. That's going to start up the local development server, and we can see now we can open up this URL right here to preview. So I'm going to control click that, and this is the website. Now, if I open the console over here, we don't see anything yet, but if I now go to index.js and start to write JavaScript, I'm just going to say console.log hello ninjas and save this. Automatically Webpack is going to run through all this configuration, and we see that live in the browser now. So now this is all ready and set up to start work on a new project, and that only took a couple of minutes. So feel free to use this boilerplate whenever you're creating your own new project. We're going to be using it in the next chapter, where we're going to be creating a small JavaScript UI library.